Hello and welcome back to the Not the Old Firm YouTube channel. My name is Ben Banks. Today on the channel, an exclusive interview with Cody Cooke. Cody spent the last 2 seasons at St Mirren, playing for the Buddies as they first of all stayed up in the Premiership and again last year staying up on what turned out to be the final game of the season through a John Obika goal. Cody Cooke spent time in those seasons in the changing room last season battling a really bad injury that kept him out for a lot of his time there, and he headed back south this summer with the best wishes of all at the club. Now playing with Weymouth in the National League and back in his old job that he used to occupy before his time at St Mirren. He looks back on his time in Paisley, some of the highlights of that time and what he's doing now in his teaching role. Lots of exclusive interviews on the channel. If you're a St Mirren fan, you might be interested in our chat with Gavin Riley from last week, reminiscing on his time in Paisley in the SPFL as he goes forward in his season with Carlisle United. So do check that out after you've watched our video with Cody. Plenty of videos to come in the next week as well, as Mull and Aberdeen have a quick turnaround in European football, alongside another exclusive interview in the middle of the week, alongside our usual Premiership previews and reviews every weekend before the Premiership action kicks off and once it is finished. Right, I'll leave you with me and Cody's chat now. Please do remember to subscribe to the channel and like the video, share the video as well. It would really mean a lot to us. And until next time, take it easy. Right, so you've obviously moved back down south, Cody. How did the move to Weymouth come about?
It was a range of different things, really. Initially, my thought was I wanted to be a little bit closer to home. I went up to Scotland and thoroughly enjoyed my time, but ultimately, I was never going to be up there for the rest of my career, and I wanted to come back closer to home at some point. And then it was just sitting down and working out what was kind of best and how that was going to fit in terms of where I wanted to go and all these things. So it was a long, drawn-out process. Don't get me wrong; it wasn't easy at all, with the uncertainty of what's going on in the world right now and everything like that. And it just happened to be that was the best suited fit for me, I felt at the time. The club, I felt, were doing everything they could to try and get me on board. Everyone from top to bottom, and I spoke to a lot of people to kind of give references really about a few clubs, because I didn't want to jump into something unknown. And then Weymouth seemed I'd done it the old kind of traditional way, and sitting down and having things on paper and methodically going through what the pros and cons, and it worked out that Weymouth was my best option moving forward, really, and that's how it come about. And it's been a really enjoyable couple of weeks since I've been there, and I'm looking forward to kind of cracking on now.
You started quite well down there, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, started all right. A couple goals in a couple games. So, but pre-season's pre-season. You can make of it what you want, and it's all about the first league game and moving into that. So, you can say what you want about pre-season, but I always take it with a pinch of salt, and ultimately it's the competitive games that you get judged on.
So when does the National League start for you? Is it this weekend, just as we record this, with the Premier League?
No, it's actually the same as the Scottish Championship and below. So the first weekend of October. So, we're still reasonably early doors in terms of pre-season and all that sort of stuff. With obviously the Premier League kicking off and the Scottish Prem already had a few weeks, etc. So, we're still a little bit away. But, I'm really looking forward to actually competitively getting back out there and playing, really.
I get the different reasons as to why leagues need to start at different times, but especially down south when there was a chance for everybody to start at the same time. Seems a bit odd that the top 4 tiers get to start when the National League, which is predominantly professional now, has to start at a different time.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's a bit very strange in terms of a lot of leagues have actually lowered down the divisions, have actually started already, and I think the main basis of that was to do with crowds and to do with how clubs are funding their way forward. I mean, the most of the professional teams from the Premier League Two could begin early because they could filter slowly fans in, but those kind of National League and at least the couple below are purely reliant upon the fans they get through the door. And I think that ultimately that it's come down to that. with fans hoping to be back involved on that first weekend of October, albeit at a limited capacity. I think that's why a lot of leagues have held off until that moment where they're almost certain fans are allowed back in. But, obviously obstacles have happened in recent weeks, and whether or not that will be the case remains to be seen, I guess. But I guess that's the thinking behind it, particularly the spread of why the leagues have started different times.
Such a big blow as well for teams like Weymouth, I'm assuming, because in the fifth tier, gate money is a lot more prevalent than it is perhaps in the Premier League and the Championship.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I mean. A lot of it have had to depend on that. And, a lot of, especially Weymouth and clubs like that, actually had the playoffs without any fans there, which, was an awful lot of money in terms of the cost of testing and all those little things that the club had to put on. And a lot of fans have got involved. I know a few clubs, especially Weymouth and other clubs, have done some crowdfunding stuff to try and get some money ultimately to get through the doors before, fans can come back in. And there's been a lot of generosity in general, I think, up and down the country with people, especially, I remember in Scotland towards the end of the season about fans not giving or opting out to give their getting refunds on their season tickets and things like that. And, a lot of that goes a long way for a lot of clubs. And I'm sure there's a lot of clubs up and down the country that will be, really welcoming fans back as soon as they can, really.
Are Weymouth full-time in the midst of all this?
No, so again, they're in the process of actually going full-time, but with what's happened and all of that sort of stuff, they've had to delay it 12 months. So they're almost kicking on and going full-time next year. And actually that was one of the reasons, or a part of one of the reasons as to why I signed initially, because I wanted a bit of security for myself and for my partner. And, I'm not necessarily a young pup anymore. I'm 27 and I'm looking at the other side of things outside of football. And that was one of the reasons that, I wanted to play as high as I could in terms of level, but I also was quite happy in terms of going back to part-time, making sure that I could get some kind of security in the form of another job, albeit that part-time in some capacity. But I wanted to have that opportunity to make sure I'm at least stable. And, I'm not moving up and down the country for sort of 6 to 12-month contracts. And I wanted to be secure down south, and then I could kind of commute and do that. So that was actually a big reason. I know people will probably look at that as a negative, but for me, the part-time thing was a real positive in terms of them being probably one of only 2 or 3 teams in the National League that are actually part-time. I mean, like you said, a lot of them, most of them, 90% of them or whatever are actually full-time. So to go to part-time in the National League, I know it's going to be a lot of travelling, and I know could have to make some sacrifices and that along the way, but that was certainly something that drew my attention to going to Weymouth in the first place. Like I said, for more reasons outside of football, really.
I think that's become more, especially in Scotland, like part-time football at that sort of level full-time football at that level isn't as sort of glamorous as it was maybe 5-10 years ago. A lot of people in Scotland, for example, there was players who have dropped out Scottish Premiership and Championship and dropped into the 5th tier. You won't be getting buttons at like Weymouth and stuff. You'll still be getting a decent wage for a part-time team, but it's also the opportunity. Would you rather make a small wage at another National League club, or you can have less at Weymouth but more outside of football as well? So overall, it's more security, like you said.
Absolutely. That's the exact reason. And for me, I've come from part-time football and then went into full-time, and so I kind of know the routine and I know how part-time football works. Whereas a lot of people, do it the other way around, I guess, and want to try and stay full-time. But for me, it wasn't necessarily about staying full-time, like I said, because of my age and because of I'm a qualified teacher on the side and all these sort of things, that actually I wanted more security. And at this moment in time, with what's going on in the world, football isn't the place necessarily that gives you that security. So I was needing to look elsewhere. And, I spoke to a few, don't get me wrong, I spoke to, a few full-time clubs and I was open to a lot of options, but as I said, I sat down methodically and kind of went through the pros and cons, and I wanted, my main focus was that security, and I knew going back in and albeit I'm going to go back into teaching within the next couple of weeks, and I'm only going to be working a couple of days a week, but again, it was something that I wanted to do and make sure that the security was there in terms of another job. And then, like I said, I could commute and stay down south for football, really. But I can see certainly why it's appealing to a lot of people. And like you said, you can see a lot of people dropping out of particular leagues because ultimately you could either, equal your wage that you are on full-time football, and a lot of people on the other side are actually making more money in terms of having a good job on the side and then actually getting all right money from part-time football as well.
What type of teaching is it you do? Is it primary school, or you and what is it you've got? It's so different, like the high schools down.
Yeah, it's different. I'm actually an associate lecturer in college, so I don't know if it's the same age groups, but it's 16 to 18 year olds in that college setting, so just after school, and teaching all areas of sport, really. Something I've really enjoyed, and I've done a couple of years. I've done my teacher training year, and then I've done a full year of teaching before I ended up signing professionally. So I knew I've always had that to go back on, and I'm lucky enough actually to go back to my old college that I did work at previously, and go back there and get some hours teaching there. So something that I'm looking forward to, and another challenge that you can challenge yourself outside of football, I guess.
Well, I'll ask you about this. This probably wasn't the question I was expecting to ask, but seeing as you're in teaching, what were your thoughts on see the exam results and stuff that came out north and south of the border, just with them? It was almost proportioned on postcode. I've always wanted to talk about it. It's not exactly on the top of my checklist every single day, but it's an interesting enough discussion just with somebody that is in teaching just now. Like, what were your sort of thoughts on it, just as someone who's dealt with kids that age?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I don't know if it was different. Was it different in Scotland?
I think it was very similar. I know when it came out in Scotland that it was pretty much that if you were from a poorer background, the chances were you were more than likely going to get, if you were graded for an A or a B by your teacher, chances were you were going to get a C or possibly a D. And I know of people, I'm only 19, so I know of a couple of people, I don't speak to them personally, but I know from social media and things like that people haven't gone into the universities or the colleges and stuff that they've wanted to go to simply because of they live in areas less fortunate than ours.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously a broad and crazy topic, but ultimately, if you look traditionally at a lot of successful business people, I mean, I'll put it towards business and sport, and a lot of people that are successful in business, successful in sport, successful in particular institutes, etc., have actually come from lower backgrounds that have had to work and fight and do all those things to get to the top level they are, and that speaks for itself. Speaks volumes. A lot of players and a lot of sports people specifically have come from those sort of backgrounds, those lower generational backgrounds that haven't necessarily got money and all those sort of things. So very interesting. It could be a topic and a debate that people could talk for hours, I'm sure, and that's something for the government and etc. to work out. But I guess I'm on similar page as you in terms of it shouldn't necessarily work on your household income and those sort of things in your backgrounds. It definitely shouldn't. And I'm sure there'll be ways, hopefully, that those students that have missed out on particular things are going to be able to get those chances at some stage to get in.
Because it's interesting that you bring up sort of footballers and things like that, because I thought that was an interesting point. Like, there will be perhaps some guys that maybe will have got professional contracts. I mean, I don't know. I'm very much, that's a hypothetical situation, but guys who perhaps were going to get contracts, not saying they didn't focus in school, but perhaps didn't get what they could have got if they'd have fully applied themselves because they're focusing on football, and then obviously COVID hits, you don't get the contract you want, you've probably not got the exam results either. It is sort of, it's a really difficult situation. I bet you there will be a couple of people who are in that boat.
100%, yeah, there'll be a lot of people, and that goes hand in hand, like you said. It's not necessarily either to do with the students or the kids not applying themselves properly, but a lot of it also comes down to the hours outside of school, what they're actually putting into practice. And I know for me, for example, I was having to travel up to Plymouth Argyle with my mum and dad 3 times a week, which was a 2-hour drive there and a 2-hour drive back to get to the club. So I was leaving, the second I left school was the second I was in the car on the way up to Plymouth and then on the way back. So you're limiting, you know, that's 2 or 3 times a week that you're limiting any sort of homework or anything that you can do, because, you know, you're traveling to and from places. So like I said, not necessarily it's about those people applying themselves properly, but it's, you know, in other words, it could be the actual time frame and how much work they're putting into something else. And if it doesn't work out, you know, there's other routes that people have to go down. And I think that's, you know, that's another topic that I'm quite passionate about in terms of other opportunities, I guess, for other people, and allowing opportunities. And you know, the numbers speak for himself in terms of the amount of people that play football from a young age, and then, you know, the percentage actually that make it professional is you know, 1% or whatever it is. So, you know, it's those opportunities and corridors have got to be open for people, and they've got to be aware of that. You know, it's not a nice conversation to have, I imagine, with young kids or with young students, that, you know, there's only going to be a handful in a whole college generation or whatever that are going to go and have careers that they're making money from football. Ultimately, it's going to be a small percentage, like I said, the 1% that's going to go and do it. So the others need to have that kind of harsh reality speaking, I guess, and understanding, you know, not everyone's going to have a career from football, and they need to have something on the side, really.
Yeah, I think that's definitely one of the things that have been taken into consideration, especially in Scotland. Like yesterday, before recording this, Hibs and Hearts have partnered up with the Edinburgh Napier University to provide their sort of academy players with a university degree alongside a football education, so it's a bit split. And I think St Mirren do the same with college as well. I'm fairly sure some of the young guys in there do go and do.
Yeah, I think they go off and do a bit on the side. That was one thing that in Scotland is actually very different in terms of Scotland and England. So if you're in a professional academy, for example, and you're full-time with that academy from the age of 16 or 18, then your educational program is a bolt-on. So you will do education on the side. So you come out with some form of educational things that you can then go into possibly university or possibly other areas that you want, but you will come out with some form of something. In Scotland, obviously, like you said, you know, St Mirren might do it and there'll be a few others, but in general, not all clubs have that capacity to go and, you know, allow education to be on the side of that as like a bolt on. So that is one thing that is different in Scotland, and you see a lot of kids, you know, who don't get professional contracts that then have these setbacks, and then they're not sure what they're going to do because they focused on football for a solid 2 years. You know, I've been lucky that I was steered in the right direction, and like I said, I'm quite passionate about it in terms of anyone I speak to, and when I'm teaching myself, you know, it's always good to have other things going on the side and not necessarily all your eggs in one basket. I know, you know, you get taught as a young kid, especially in football, that, you know, it's everything. You got to give everything to be able to make it, and they're right. You know, you've got to dedicate so much time and effort and money and everything to be able to make it in football. But on the same side, like I said, those numbers are very limited in terms of who go on and make a career, and there's got to be a bit of give in terms of knowing what you can do on the side, and you know, if it means that you're missing one training session a week or whatever it is in order to complete a BTEC or complete a degree or whatever it may be, I'm like I said, I'm quite passionate about that, certainly.
Well, I'm assuming your students will be showing this year's St Mirren highlight reels and things like that.
I think that will just be up on the screen on repeat while we're getting on with some lessons and homework or whatever it might be. But just put on my highlights reel on the corner. I'm not sure. It'd be interesting actually, because a lot of students probably, obviously the students that I taught before I went and signed for St Mirren would have followed and seen what I'd done in my journey. But the new students that I'll be going on into this semester or this September, you know, a lot of them wouldn't have heard of me or seen me before or whatever. So it would be quite nice to just keep that maybe under wraps. And if they ask me if I do anything else on the side, or if I've done anything else the last couple of years, I might be able to talk them about my hat trick or something.
Right. Be able to walk in, the full kit will give it away when you walk in with your match worn shirt and shorts. You give it away. But to speak a bit about the football, how did you view your time in Paisley? I think it was a team in Cornwall you were with it before that, and then to jump up to the rough and tumble of the Scottish Premiership must have been a bit of a shock.
Yeah, it was. It really was. And like I said, I had a few offers that summer that I moved to St Mirren. I had a few things and a few offers available as well. And exactly the same, really. I sat down and worked out, what was best. And similar, I was leaving a club that I'd been at for nearly 8 years that, I loved, and it was my hometown club. And we'd gone up through the kind of leagues with them, and I loved everything about it. And then I had a good job on the side that I was enjoying every day, and I was getting more confident, and I was really enjoying. So to come out of both of those things was quite a step initially, because, I wasn't sure if it was something that I really wanted to go into. I had a couple opportunities, maybe when I was about 22, 23, to go into full-time football. And at the time I was just finishing my degree. I've just finished my degree, and I was starting my teacher training. And, like the conversation we had earlier, it wasn't something that really appealed to me to go and sign somewhere for a year. And although the opportunity was at the time all right, where would it leave me in 12 months' time? And I always kind of felt like that, yes, you could go on and kick on and score 20 goals and go on and have a good career, but ultimately you could have a year that you get injuries and you pick up little bits and the manager changes and those sort of things, and then you can have a, as equal but a negative year. So I always thought about things properly, and when the St Mirren one come around, I was always going to be up there for 2 years. Whether or not I was going to start signing an extension after, or whatever, remained to be seen, or whether I was going to stay up there after. But, like I said, it was always a kind of short-term plan, but I was always going to stay there for the duration of my contract, and made sure that I worked hard every single day and made sure that I come back at whatever point, obviously back down the road after 2.5 years or whatever. But there's not one regret I can look back on now and think, I wish I'd worked harder, I wish I'd done this, or I wish I'd done that. Ultimately, you're in control of what you're in control of, and everything else around that, you're not in control of. We had 3 managers since in the time that I was there. The turnover in players must have been, X amount of players. There was injuries left, right and centre of particular things that I'd never had issues with. And, the change of living, and then the weather, and, everything was completely different. And like I said, I controlled what I could control. And that was just working hard day in, day out, and making sure that I could try my best to be available on a Saturday. And if I was in the team, I was brilliant. And if not, then I'd work hard and harder. And that was kind of how it went for 2 years, really. And like I said, a lot of things I couldn't have controlled, like with the manager changes and all those things. And ultimately, that's probably why I didn't really get the chances that I felt at the time, and certainly look back on and feel like I deserved. But at the same time, I was picking up slight injuries, or I was picking up, something would happen, and then it would just fall back. So, but I look back with fond memories for sure, and I'll always look back, and I'll keep in contact with a lot of people, and I made a lot of friends, and I'll look back with certainly no regrets. But at the same time, I think under certain circumstances I was quite unlucky, but things, like I said, I couldn't really control.
Well, you'd have been brought in by Alan Stubbs at the time that brought you in, and then it changed his manager. It was a bizarre time, just how quickly he was out the door there.
I know, I think it was 6 weeks or somewhere around that, which, for the manager that signed you to come in to then leave 6 weeks later and you're on a 2-year contract, is a little bit daunting at the time. And it's, like I said, things like that you can't control as a player, and the board at the time felt that was the right decision, and, they went with it, and you can't hold any grudges towards anyone. And that was how the club felt at the time. They needed to go. And again, for players, it just meant that you knew there was going to be a big turnaround. And actually, you know, the turnaround was quite significant from the time that Oren Kearney first come in to when he left. I imagine the player turnover, I don't know what it was in numbers, but it was probably quite big. And then the same again in the summer after, when Jim Goodwin come in, and then there's another turnover. So, you know, you're always fighting an uphill battle when you're not necessarily the manager's signing or the manager's player. You know, that's a given in football. You know, the manager comes in and signs his own players, regardless of whatever level that is. And, you know, at times I just felt I was unlucky with terms of that. But like I said, I've got absolutely no regrets, and I'll give everything I could at the time.
You stayed up with Owen Kearney. He then goes back, ironically enough, to teaching, and then Jim Goodwin comes in, and for me, he seems to have stabilised the club a wee bit, just in terms of like this summer, the turnover of players not been quite as drastic, and the full club just seemed a bit calmer under him. Yeah,
definitely. I think he, you know, as his goal, I'd imagine, was to come in and stabilise the club. And I think anyone who is given the chance and you're given the opportunity, then, you know, over a period of time, you can transform the changing room into your own changing room, and you've got access to stabilise the club. You know, I think the two managers previous obviously had short stints that were kind of, especially Oren's reign, if you look at it, you know, his sole aim was to stay in the league, and that was really it, rather than thinking about long term. So a lot of those players come in, you know, from short term loans just to get us over the line and make sure we stayed up. Obviously, Jim Goodwin's a bit more looking at the kind of longevity and getting players in for him who are going to play under him for longer periods of time. But, you know, he certainly stabilised it. And, you know, having looked at the previous results at the start of this league campaign, they've done well. And, you know, like I said, I'll look at results as I go down throughout my career now, and I'll keep looking at results, and I'll wish everyone at the club all the best. And, you know, they've deserved to stay in that league for sure. And, you know, like I said, I'll be in contact with a lot of people for hopefully a long period of time.
You and Jim Goodwin must have got on really well, because you both talk a very good game.
I mean, he didn't offer me a new deal, so I don't know how well we did that. Nah, like I said, I've got no hard feelings towards anyone. Like, you know, I'm one of those people that I like to see the good in everyone, and ultimately come in and he needed to pick his own team and pick his own squad, and, you know, I just didn't fit into those plans for whatever reason. And, you know, like I said, it was always a short-term thing for me in terms of that anyway. I knew I was going to be coming down the road after my contract was up anyway, regardless if I got a new deal or not. But the only thing is, you know, I was just unlucky, I feel like, in that year, that for the majority of the year I was out, obviously, with a long-term injury. I probably only come back, played 5 or 6 games, and then, you know, I had a couple of games out or whatever, and then the COVID stuff happened. So it was one of them things that I was probably just unlucky that, you know, I didn't necessarily, wasn't able to show what I could do to him, or show what I could do on the pitch early on in his reign, which, you know, might have had an impact in terms of who he brought in, for sure, because if I was doing well and firing on all cylinders early days, then he might have not brought in particular people. So it's one of them, and like I said, it just felt unlucky at the time. But I've got no hard feelings whatsoever towards him, and I wish them all the best.
Was that your first proper long-term injury, that one that you got?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I've always been lucky, really, touch wood, with injuries. I've always had, you know, niggles here and there, and be out for a couple of weeks or out for a month, but nothing ever serious. And then obviously when I'd done my knee, it was quite a serious one in terms of what I'd ever done. So it was a lot of rehab and stuff like that, and it was a bit of a strange one because I didn't end up getting an operation on it, which, you know, I went and seen a specialist in London, didn't need an operation and stuff. So it was a lot of rehab where, you know, mentally it's quite hard to get over an injury that you feel that was quite damaged, or you were told that it's quite damaged, and then for not any operations and things like that, to suddenly get your head over, you know, doing that kind of strengthening work every day was quite difficult. But, you know, luckily, touch wood, I got over that towards, you know, certainly before the COVID stuff happened, and then I've not had anything since. So, touch wood that I can have an injury-free season this year and, you know, go on and kick on really.
So, well, was it see like with your knee? Because I had like a couple of problems when I played a few years ago, and it was, I don't know if you're the same, but was it one of those injuries where you feel like nothing's really wrong, but it's still, but you're being told that is? Is it one of them, or could you tell like, oh, my knee's done here?
I guess to a certain extent, yeah. I mean, the pain I was getting initially when I got my scans and stuff was in a completely different area to where the actual injury was, which was a strange one. And then second to that, I didn't actually have a moment that I could look back on that it happened, or, you know, in a way it's a positive now, because if it was a tackle or something like that, that you might go into a similar scenario now and you might be a little bit blinkered towards it because it's a similar action as to what happened when you got injured or whatever. So I don't have that kind of experience to look back on. But at the same time, it was a strange injury to kind of happen where I didn't really know what I'd done and I was getting pain in a different area. And then, like I said, then to get scans and things like that, and then see the specialist, that again, it was a roller coaster of emotions, because I got a phone call on one of the evenings when my scan results come back saying that I'd completely torn the ligament and I was going to be out for 9 months. And then about 2 weeks later, I went down and seen a specialist about getting the operation and all these sort of things. And the specialist then said that it had healed a bit more than he thought in the couple of weeks, that I was in a brace and that I wouldn't need an operation and that I could do everything off the mark, really. So again, that was a bit of a roller coaster of up and down, but at least, you know, I was managed to get back fit kind of around Christmas and then back in the fold, because if it was any longer and then I possibly not played any games last year, and then obviously the Corona stuff happened, you know, that would have been a long period of time, that, you know, a 9-month injury and then the Corona stuff, you're talking maybe that you haven't played a game for 14, 15 months, which, you know, is not going to be good for anyone. So I'm glad that I got back at the time that I did, and then could kind of hit the ground running, knowing that I'll go into a club this year, having played a few games at the back end of last year, and making sure that I'm in the right condition, really.
Right, just finally then, sort of thoughts for the season? Hopefully play a full card of games and a few goals along the way.
Yeah, exactly that. You know, first and foremost, I want just an injury-free season. Like I said, after the things that had happened last year, I just wanted to make sure that I can have a full season of you know, games really, and having that week-to-week feeling of getting back and playing. And then, yeah, you know, chipping in with some goals and having a bit of a experience on the way. You know, like any season in any club, wherever you are up and down the country, there's going to be ups and downs, and, you know, you kind of miss that when you're not being involved. You know, some weeks is horrible and you've lost and you've missed the sitter or whatever, and then it can flip so quickly on a Tuesday night, you know, the game after, the elation of scoring and all of those things that go with it and winning the game. So I'm looking forward to those emotions to come back, certainly. But, you know, I'm just excited by a new challenge, new people, new friends and new staff to impress, and new fans to impress and to speak to. And I'm just looking forward to a new challenge. And like I said, it's one that's going to be really exciting, I think.